Lila Robbins has been seen on Broadway in Heartbreak House, the Tony-nominated play Frozen with a Lucille Lortel nomination, The Herbal Bed, and The Real Thing, directed by Mike Nichols. Robbins is among a short list of the busiest New York actors, creating roles on and off Broadway, in the finest regional theaters, and in film and television. She recently ventured into new territory with Dangerous Beauty, a new Broadway-bound musical. She was the series lead in Gabriel's Fire, opposite James Earl Jones, and appeared with Gabriel Byrne in the HBO hit In Treatment. Robbins trained at the Yale School of Drama. She will be reading an Edith Wharton piece called Roman Fever. Please welcome Lila Robbins.
It was the only letter I ever had from him. And I wrote it. Yes, I wrote it. But I was the girl he was engaged to. Did you happen to remember that? Mrs. Ansley's head drooped again. I'm not trying to excuse myself. I remember. And still you went. Still I went. Mrs. Slade stood looking down on the small, bowed figure at her side. The flame of her wrath had already sunk, and she wondered why she had ever thought there would be any satisfaction in inflicting so purposeless a wound on her friend. But she had to justify herself. You do understand. I found out, and I hated you. I knew you were in love with Delphin, and I was afraid of you, of your quiet ways, your sweetness, well, I wanted you out of the way, that's all, just for a few weeks, just till I was sure of him. So in a blind fury, I wrote that letter. I don't know why I'm telling you now. I suppose, said Mrs. Ansley slowly, it's because you've always gone on hating me. Perhaps. Or because I want to get the whole thing off my mind, she paused. I'm glad you destroyed the letter. Of course, I never thought you'd die. Mrs. Ansley relapsed into silence, and Mrs. Slade, leaning above her, was conscious of a strange sense of isolation, of being cut off from the warm current of human communion. You think me a monster? I don't know. It was the only letter I had, and you say he didn't write it. How do you care for him still? I cared for that memory, said Mrs. Ansley. Mrs. Slade continued to look down on her. She seemed physically reduced by the blow, as if when she got up, the wind might scatter her like a puff of dust. Mrs. Slade's jealousy suddenly leaped up again at the sight. All these years, the woman had been living on that letter. How she must have loved him, to treasure the mere memory of his ashes. The letter of the man her friend was engaged to. Wasn't it she who was the monster? You tried your best to get him away from me, didn't you? But you failed, and I kept him. That's all. Yes, that's all. I wish now I hadn't told you. I had no idea you'd feel about it as you do. I thought you'd be amused. It all happened so long ago, as you say, and you must do me the justice to remember that I had no reason to think you'd ever taken it seriously. And how could I, when you were married to Horace? You were married to Horace Ansley 2 months afterwards. As soon as you could get out of your bed, your mother rushed you off to Florence and married you. People were rather surprised. They wondered at its being done so quickly. But I thought I knew. I had an idea you did have peak, to be able to say you got ahead of Delphin and me. Kids have such silly reasons for doing the most serious things, and your marrying so soon convinced me that you never really cared. Yes, I suppose it would, Mrs. Ansley assented. The clear heaven overhead was emptied of all its gold. Dusk spread over it, abruptly darkening the 7 hills. Here and there, lights began to twinkle through the foliage at their feet. Steps were coming and going on the deserted terrace. Waiters looking out of the doorway at the head of the stairways, then reappearing with trays and napkins and flasks of wine. Tables were moved, chairs straightened. A feeble string of electric lights flickered out. A stout lady in a dust coat suddenly appeared, asking in broken Italian if anyone had seen the elastic band which held together her tattered Baedeker. She poked with her stick under the table at which she had lunched. The waiters assisting. The corner where Mrs. Slade and Mrs. Ansley sat was still shadowy and deserted. For a long time, neither of them spoke. At length, Mrs. Slade began again. I suppose I did it as a sort of joke. A joke? Well, girls are ferocious sometimes, girls in love especially. And I remember laughing to myself all that evening at the idea that you were waiting around there in the dark, dodging out of sight, listening for every sound, trying to get in. Of course, I was upset when I heard you were so ill afterward. Mrs. Ansley had not moved for a long time. But now she turned slowly toward her companion. But I didn't wait. He'd arranged everything. He was there. We were let in at once, she said. Mrs. Slade sprang up from her leaning position. Delphin, there! They let you in? Now you're lying, she burst out with violence. Mrs. Ansley's voice grew clearer and full of surprise. But of course he was there. Naturally, he came. Came? How did he know he'd find you there? You must be raving. Mrs. Ansley hesitated as though reflecting. But I answered the letter. I told him I'd be there. So he came. Mrs. Slade flung her hands into her face. Oh, God! You answered! I never thought of you answering! It's odd you never thought of it if you wrote the letter. Yes, I was blind with rage. Mrs. Ansley rose and drew her fur scarf about her. It is cold here. We better go. I'm sorry for you, she said as she clasped the fur about her throat. The unexpected word sent a pang through Mrs. Slade. Yes, we'd better go. She gathered up her bag and cloak. I don't know why you should be sorry for me, she muttered. Mrs. Ansley stood looking away from her toward the dusky mass of the Colosseum. Well, because I didn't have to wait that night. Mrs. Slade gave an unquiet laugh. Yes, I was beaten there. But I oughtn't to begrudge it to you, I suppose. At the end of all these years, after all, I had everything. I had him for 25 years, and you had nothing but that one letter that he didn't write. Mrs. Ansley was again silent. At length, she took a step toward the door of the terrace and turned back, facing her companion. I had Barbara, she said, and began to move ahead of Mrs. Slade toward the stairway.